The biggest game of the season is finally here, and Chelsea meet Manchester City in what is the first All-English Champions League final since 2019. It hasn't been that long, but it does mark the first time Chelsea and Man City have played each other in Europe since 1971. The two clubs will be flying out to Porto this week, with Chelsea looking to win their first trophy in the Thomas Tuchel era, and Manchester City looking to win their first ever Champions League. In today's video, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the main tactics that we're likely to see in the Champions League final. Firstly, let's start with Chelsea and what their starting 11 is likely to look like on Saturday. Since the arrival of Thomas Tuchel, Chelsea have been pretty consistent with the 3-4-2-1, and I don't think things will change for the final. The main issues facing Chelsea are some injury concerns to some key players. It is expected Edouard Mendy will be fit and back in goal, and that both Kante and Christensen will both be in the squad. The back three of Chelsea will likely look like Rudiger, Silva and Azpilicueta, while the two fullbacks will probably be taken up by Reece James and Ben Chilwell. If Christensen is to start, then Azpilicueta will likely take the wing-back position from Reece James. The midfield duo is a tricky one, with Kovacic being back from injury, but Tuchel having a hard time dropping Jorginho for the Croatian. And the midfield partnership will likely be the duo that knocked Real Madrid out of the Champions League, with Jorginho and Kante. Finally, the front three will almost certainly feature Chelsea's player of the season, Mason Mount, with Werner on the left and Kai Havertz as a false nine. At times, the formation can adapt into a 3-4-1-2, with Mount coming into the midfield line and allowing Werner and Havertz to float in and out of the striker position. So almost certainly, Chelsea will line up in Tuchel's preferred 3-4-2-1. Now let's take a look at how Guardiola might counter this. Guardiola has been incredibly consistent with his formation this season, and the 4-3-3 has been their go-to formation throughout the year. While he did play the 4-4-2 against PSG in the semi-final, I think the final will see him play what he knows best, and the 4-3-3 is likely to be the choice. Ederson will be in goal, and the back four of Walker, Stones, Diaz and Cancelo looks likely. The only doubt is Cancelo, who will have to battle it out with Zinchenko on the left. Rodrigo and Fernandinho are both in contention for the CDM spot, but my bet is the more defensive-minded Fernandinho will be the starting choice for Guardiola, alongside Gundogan and Bernardo Silva. The hardest position to pin down this season is who will start in the false nine position. While Aguero is back in the team, he is unlikely to start in the final, as he hasn't featured all season, and the front three of Mahrez, De Bruyne and Foden looks to be City's best option in attack. Or if Sterling is used as a starter, then De Bruyne could move into the midfield, alongside Foden and Fernandinho, and the front three of Mahrez, Gundogan and Sterling could also be an option. So Tuchel's 3-4-2-1 will likely go up against Guardiola's 4-3-3, and now let's take a look at what each team will attempt to do in possession. Let's start with Chelsea. While normally possession-based teams struggle to cope with City, Tuchel has proven to be capable of troubling Guardiola, and Chelsea have been extremely difficult to break down. They have been excellent during defensive transitions, with both Jorginho and Kante venting any attacking threat, and their dynamism going forward could be something that they will look to exploit, with Mount, Werner and Havertz all being tricky to defend against. With Chelsea building up from the back line, they can immediately create overloads down the flank. This overload often occurs down the right, and when the two centre-backs split, Azpilicueta will move out wide, allowing Reece James to push even further up the pitch. If Azpilicueta is to receive the ball in this position, then Chelsea could immediately find themselves in a 3v2 on the flank, with Mount further up in the half space. City may look to counter this advantage by having the holding mid Fernandinho or Rodri push over to even out the numbers, but by doing this, Chelsea's false nine in Havertz can drop deep into the midfield and find himself with plenty of space between the lines, allowing for Mount and Werner to push up on the opposition's backline and be played in behind. Or City could look to press Chelsea's back three and make it difficult for them to gain any ground. While this could cause issues for Chelsea, if they're able to break the first line of press, then City could find themselves in a lot of trouble, especially down the flanks. With James and Chilwell pushing up on the wings, Mount and Werner can move into the half spaces, and Chelsea could immediately find themselves in a 5v4, and will look to expose gaps between the centre-backs and full-backs. As a result, I feel it's unlikely that City will press with three players in attack, and will likely shift into either a 4-5-1 or 4-4-2 when defending. Now, while both these players could see Chelsea expose gaps on the flanks, where this game will be won is in the midfield. On paper, City have a man advantage in the centre, which would suggest Chelsea will attempt to avoid this area as much as possible. But with Mount and Havertz both being comfortable dropping into deeper positions, this 3v2 can easily switch into a 4v3, and is here where we can see the importance of having a false 9 in this lineup. Jorginho likes to play in a deep central role to overcome the first line of press, and by doing this will likely drag one of the centre mids out of the centre, freeing up direct channels for Mount and Havertz to receive the ball and start their attack. Finally, another way Chelsea can gain an advantage in the midfield is with Toni Rudiger. We've seen how on countless occasions he has burst into the midfield, breaking the first line and making the midfield scramble into their position. If City press with a front two, then Rudiger could have space to run infield and pick out a player further up the pitch. Chelsea definitely have plenty of options to exploit going forward, but the same goes for Pep Guardiola, and there are a few things that Chelsea will need to look out for when defending. Now, in Guardiola's 4-3-3, there are a lot of things that could cause some issues to Chelsea. Firstly, the gap between the wing-backs and the wide centre-backs will be the main area where players like Mahrez and Foden will look to cut inside. The issue for Chelsea will be if there is a disconnect between the wing-backs and the centre-backs, as Chelsea like to push their wing-backs as high up the pitch as possible to stretch the opposition's back line, meaning counter-attacks are definitely a weak point for Tuchel's team. Chelsea have, however, proven to be able to shuffle effectively and stop teams from moving into these positions. But with the team shuffling out wide, City could look to exploit switches of play. The three forwards will naturally play in very wide positions, forcing Chelsea's back line to stretch to cover any potential switches. But this is where the extremely creative De Bruyne, Gundogan and Silva can attack from more central areas. By moving the ball from one flank to the other, City can now apply pressure on the back three, either by pushing them back and freeing up space on the edge of the box, or by allowing them to play balls in behind to the runners. Now, when building up, Guardiola will almost certainly look to get his fullbacks involved. On paper, the midfield should be even in a 3v3 when Chelsea's defending, given that Mount will drop deep and Werner and Havertz will press Stones and Diaz. But with City's inverted fullbacks, it's likely that they can move into central areas and create overloads in the centre, accomplishing many things at once. Firstly, it opens direct channels into either Foden or Mahrez on the flanks, where we've seen how they could potentially exploit switches in play. Secondly, it completely overloads Chelsea's midfield, meaning Mount and Kante will find themselves in a 3v2, and Jorginho could be in a 2v1, and thus allowing De Bruyne, Gundogan and Silva to push on the three centre-backs. And it's in this area where I think City could cause the most amount of problems for Chelsea. Playing with a false 9 allows all three of these players to come into the midfield and rotate fluidly, which could slowly create gaps as the centre-backs take it in turn to step out of the defensive line, potentially freeing up space for balls in behind. Finally, the other main issue facing Chelsea is just the sheer talent in this City team, with Mahrez, De Bruyne and Foden all being able to change the game in the blink of an eye. It will mean Chelsea cannot lose their man or concentration for the whole 90 minutes. As with all major finals, I wouldn't expect both teams to be aggressive on the attack from kickoff, and I do expect the first half or at least the first 30 minutes of the game to be pretty cagey in nature, as both teams try and figure out how their opponents are going to play. However, in the second half, I do think some major tactical changes will be made by both managers and the game will start to open up. But these are just my thoughts on how the final will be played, and I'm curious to know what you guys think. Leave your score predictions in the comments down below, along with any suggestions for future videos. Next week, we'll be taking a look at how the game panned out, along with any tactics that these managers used that maybe we didn't expect. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.